Julius II, nicknamed the Terrible, the Pope who still stirs up controversy to this day. Is it true he financed Michelangelo and his masterpieces with war loot? Was he really an art enthusiast? Or were these all calculated propaganda moves? How does a boy from a poor family suddenly don the papal tiara and take the name Julius II, in honor of the legendary Julius Caesar? In just a moment, we'll dive into more of these old tales. It was the morning of May 10, 1508. In the workshop beside the church of San Pietro in Vincoli, Michelangelo had been laboring for weeks on the model for the reigning pope's tomb, Pope Julius II. So completely absorbed in his work, he didn't even notice the messenger standing in the doorway with a parchment scroll. When he finally unrolled it, his eyebrows shot up in surprise, an urgent summons to a private audience with His Holiness. The Vatican was suffused with an uncanny silence, as if the marble columns themselves were holding their breath. Michelangelo entered the modest study, his hands nervously clutching the scroll. Pope Julius II, resplendent in his red mantle and biretta, gave a curt nod, commanding him to sit. At last, the Pope laid a purse of fine brocade on the desk. 500 ducats to begin with, he said, and the rest when the frescoes cover the entire ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. The sculptor dared not refuse the powerful pontiff. He knew the gold in that purse had been seized from the Baglioni and Bentivoglio families, their cities personally invaded by the Holy Father. As Michelangelo left the Vatican, he hardly glanced at the heavy pouch. Instead, he felt the full weight of the monumental task ahead. Meanwhile, comfortably settled in his chair, Julius II allowed himself to be reassured that this investment in art would yield vast political returns. He felt as confident as he had in the spring of 1506, when he first marched off to claim the gold he was now sharing with Michelangelo. He recalled that military campaign, which to date remained his greatest victory. The summer of 1506 was scorching, but it was the news coming out of Rome that was truly on fire. Pope Julius II set out at the head of an army of several thousand toward Perugia. Clad in shining armor, he looked more like an ancient general than the head of the church. Word of the Pope going to war reverberated across Europe, giving rise to whispers of the warrior Pope. Rumors had already swirled when, backed by gold and political maneuvering, he was proclaimed successor to St. Peter. They also spoke of a masterstroke of diplomacy, how he patched up differences between France and Emperor Maximilian I, forging an alliance that let him reclaim key Venetian fortresses without shedding a drop of Christian blood. In just 3 years, he'd lifted the papal states from their knees, strengthened his authority, and overhauled the tax system, preparing the treasury for grand ventures, including a military campaign to assert papal power over rebellious territories. That September, flanked by the newly formed Swiss Guard, the Holy Father appeared before Perugia's walls. The city's fortifications were impressive, but his guard, drawn from the elite Swiss mercenaries just months before, showed no fear, standing in perfect formation in their colorful uniforms. They were a living emblem of papal propaganda. As autumn winds began to blow, Julius II issued an ultimatum to Perugia. Rather than endure a long siege, the city faced an interdict, being cut off from all the sacraments. In an age when faith underpinned every aspect of life, this was a devastating threat. Inside those stone walls, the city's ruler, John Paolo Baglioni, weighed his options. Continue to resist, and he'd risk excommunication and the ruin of his family. A drawn-out siege would mean death for innocents and alienate crucial allies across Italy. So, in a gesture of humility, Baglioni walked unarmed to meet the warrior pope, bareheaded and carrying the city's keys. Julius received them gravely. "I accept these for the good of the church." Perugia's leaders kept their lives and estates. The pope entered the city not as a brutal conqueror but as a restorer of order, wearing his pontifical mozzetta beneath a canopy borne by local dignitaries. Streets were festooned with banners and garlands, citizens watched in awed silence, and a mass of justice was celebrated in the cathedral. By nightfall he was already en route north. Bologna awaited, and its ruler, Giovanni II Bentivoglio, would soon learn that the twin weapons of spiritual sanction and real steel were far more effective than any lengthy siege. Thus was born the legend of the warrior pope, combining the power of the cross with the might of arms to rebuild the church's authority in central Italy. Winter 1506 brought bitter cold, yet the papal army pressed on through the Umbrian hills toward Bologna. Julius II, unfazed by mud and frost, led his troops with the same iron will that had opened Perugia's gates. That resolve likely sprang from his humble beginnings, Giuliano della Rovere, born into poverty alongside 5 siblings. At 12, dressed in a simple habit, he journeyed to Urbino where his uncle Francesco della Rovere, the future Pope Sixtus IV, was climbing the church's ranks. There, amid the hush of the Curia, he first glimpsed the glare of high ecclesiastical politics. So he was not deterred when Bologna, proud seat of the Bentivoglio family, prepared to resist. The Pope responded with a show of force. Papal banners arranged in battle order, fresh French cavalry ready at his side. Thousands of soldiers stood poised to breach the walls. Giovanni II Bentivoglio, a seasoned politician and soldier like Baglioni before him, faced a grim choice. Defy such power and doom his house and his people to slaughter, prolong the conflict and court internal revolt. Indeed, Bolognese citizens, chafing under his autocratic rule, were on the brink of uprising. When news of the papal army's advance spread, riots broke out. Bentivoglio fled the city under cover of night with his family, sparing their lives. At dawn over the flat plains of Emilia-Romagna, Julius II re-entered Bologna, again hailed not as an invader but as a triumphant arbiter of justice. Papal flags flew from the ramparts, crowds broke into the Te Deum, and a solemn mass was said in the cathedral to celebrate the restoration of divine order. The Pope ordered the Bentivoglio Palace razed, a lasting warning that no human pride would ever again challenge the Church. From those ruined foundations, Julius II built a new power, fusing the majesty of the cross with martial strength. And so the legend of the warrior Pope grew, fed by the thunder of collapsing walls and the hush of humbled hearts. At the moment of this victory, the Pope was 62, but his military role was far from over. On the contrary, new opportunities were just opening before him. That's it for today's episode. If you want to follow more of this extraordinary Pope story, one who entered history not only as a tough, uncompromising ruler but also as a generous patron of the arts whose masterpieces we still admire, subscribe to the channel.